This meaningless jumble of letters is in fact a secret message, encrypted using a code known as le chiffre Indechiffrable, the uncrackable code. Indeed, le chiffre Indechiffrable withstood the efforts of the greatest code breakers in the world. For over 200 years, absolutely nobody could crack this cipher. However, this is the story of how Charles Babbage, father of the modern computer and a closet codebreaker, had the intellectual audacity to try and break le chiffre Indechiffrable. " 150 years ago saw the heyday of the Industrial Revolution. Technology was changing the world. But while the dramatic influence of steam power is well known, another arguably more enduring breakthrough was also taking place. By 1850, the electric telegraph connected all the major cities in England and was rapidly spreading throughout the world.
What's notable about the telegraph is that for the first time you wire up the whole world with this network. You can send messages from one country to another very quickly, and you have this idea of a global online community. And this is something that we think of as a very modern phenomenon. But arguably, the real communications revolution happened in the 1840s with the setting up of this Victorian internet.
The telegraph spawned its very own version of e-commerce. Instant communication was a tremendous boon for business. But there was a problem. It was notoriously easy to eavesdrop on the telegraph. A commercially sensitive message to a colleague could be intercepted by a bitter rival.
Telegraph operators were bribed in order to give the results of horse races that they were sending by telegraph. And then people could go and place bets on the horses before the bookmakers had heard the results, and they'd be guaranteed to win. And if you're running an empire using the telegraph, then you need more security than that. And of course that means using codes.
In fact, Victorians were no strangers to codes and code breaking. It was a popular hobby, rather like solving crosswords today. Many amateur cryptographers suggested new codes to make the telegraph more secure. Now, most of these codes were based on the principle of substitution, which simply means substituting one letter for a different letter. Now, one way to do that is to use the Caesar cipher. Here I've got two disks with two alphabets, and I can shift the alphabets by shifting the disks. So now A is substituted for C, B for D, and so on. In this position, the word cat would be encrypted as follows. C becomes E, A becomes C, and T becomes V. Here, I've encrypted another message using the Caesar cipher. It looks incomprehensible, but is it really secure? Now, the problem with this system is that it's relatively easy to crack the substitution cipher using something known as frequency analysis. Now, if you take any piece of English text, the most common letter is nearly always the letter E. E is always frequent. Now, the way the codebreaker uses this information is as follows. First, the codebreaker looks for the commonest letter in the encrypted message, which in this case is H. So H probably represents E. And as H comes 3 letters after E, it means that every letter in the message was shifted forward 3 places. So the codebreaker simply shifts all the letters back 3 places to reveal the original message. Clearly, for sensitive information, from racing results to commercial secrets, a far stronger cipher was needed. It would emerge from the strangest of places. The claim to have devised an unbreakable cipher ideal for the telegraph came from an obscure Bristol dentist called John Hall Brock Thwaites. Thwaites went public in a letter to the Royal Society of Arts, a highly respected Victorian institution.
Sir, permit me to make known a system of secret or cipher writing I have lately invented. By its means, messages of the most private character may be sent over the electric telegraph without any chance of discovery.
This was an extraordinary claim, and to find out if it's true, I've come to meet expert cryptographer Fred Piper.
So great about Thwaites' cipher.
He explained that Thwaites had come up with an ingenious elaboration on the Caesar cipher.
Instead of using one Caesar cipher, he uses a sequence of them in rotation.
Right.
And probably the easiest thing is just looking at...
In fact, Thwaites' cipher uses 26 Caesar shifts.
Yes.
And how are we going
He put the original alphabet at the top of a grid,
You want to be able to choose
and below it he put 26 shifted alphabets,
several lines?
each one representing a different position on the shifted wheel.
Okay. And how do we decide which ones we're going to use?
Well, the simplest way...
To actually encrypt the message using this grid, you start by choosing something called a keyword.
So I've got my message here, defend east of castle. So we need a keyword.
You need a keyword, yeah.
Okay.
You choose.
Turkey.
Turkey, okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight the 6 rows here that correspond to Turkey.
Right.
While I'm doing that, you write down Turkey above the message and just
Right.
keep repeating it over and over again till you get to the end of the message.
U R
And I'm going to fill in the T,
E Y
and then the U,
R K
and then the R,
E Y
then the
T
K,
U R
then the E, and then the
K
Y.
E Y.
Now we've got 6 rows filled in. The first letter you want to encrypt is D.
Right. D for defence.
So we come to the D,
Yeah.
and we come to the row that has the T for Turkey.
And that gives me
W.
W. Okay, so next I want to encrypt the letter E according to the row U.
Row U, so we use letter E, key row U, and we get Y.
And then I want to encrypt the letter D according to
S, according to R, gives me J,
according to K,
T, key row R, letter F,
and then just E according to L,
P,
E according to Y.
E, according to Y, gives us a C.
Okay, so that's my encrypted message. That's what
Right.
I'd send
Yep,
to the receiver.
that's the cryptogram.
And why is this form of encryption so wonderful?
Well, if you look now at the message,
Right,
you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 E's in the message.
right,
If you're using a Caesar cipher, they would all become the same letter in the cryptogram.
right.
But now this E has become a Y, this E has become an O, this E has become an X, and this E has become a C. So the frequency analysis just can't work anymore.
The frequency analysis effectively
That's right.
is useless.
That's right.
I'll send it on its way.
Okay.
Thwaites thought he was on the brink of making cryptographic history. He was so excited by his code that he even applied to patent a mechanical device that would make encoding a message quicker. It seemed that Thwaites' code would make him a Victorian.com millionaire. But then disaster struck. A letter signed only by the mysterious initial C said,
Sir, the cipher in the journal is a very old one, and to be found in most of the books.
C was absolutely right. Unknown to Thwaites, Frenchman Blaise de Vigenère had invented the identical cipher over 2 centuries earlier. Used by the military and governments to protect their secrets, the Vigenère cipher had remained unbroken for 250 years. Not surprisingly, it became known as le chiffre Indechiffrable, the uncrackable code. Nevertheless, in his letter, C claimed that the Vigenère cipher might be crackable. This was cryptographic dynamite. Thwaites now forced C's hand. He issued a public challenge. He published this message encrypted using the Vigenère cipher and demanded that C crack it. But who was the anonymous C? C was none other than Charles Babbage, one of the most brilliant and intuitive scientists England has ever produced. He designed robots that played games, a precursor to the modern telephone, and even a cowcatcher for trains. Most famous of all was this extraordinary device, a so-called difference engine. Babbage designed several such cogwheel machines, which together contain all the principles of modern computing.
Babbage was a very well-known figure in his day. His engines and his attempts to build them were part of the celebrated folklore of the time. He was a mesmerizing raconteur. He would keep people transfixed for hours on end. His soirees, his Saturday evening parties at his house, was the centre of social life in London. If you wanted to know what was going on in science, literature and art, you went to Babbage's on Saturday, because there you would meet the glitterati of the social and intellectual life of London.
Less well known was Babbage's lifelong fascination with code breaking. Code breaking was the ultimate puzzle, and puzzles were something that Babbage felt compelled to solve.
He fixated, if you like, on the issue in front of him, and whether that was cracking a code or devising a machine or building a chess-playing device, he engaged with it immediately and intensely to the almost complete disregard of his own position and everybody else.
Thwaites' challenge was no exception. Babbage attacked it with the same passion he brought to all his other endeavours. But this was the ultimate problem. Could he crack the toughest code so far invented? Could he crack le chiffre Indechiffrable? Charles Babbage had set himself the task of breaking the unbreakable Vigenère cipher. But taking on the impossible was nothing new to Babbage. As a teenager, Babbage invented a device for walking on water, and this is it. Essentially, it's just a book cover strapped to each foot. Now, the idea is when you raise the foot, the book cover closes, but as you stamp it down, the book cover opens and gives you some sort of support. And in theory, if you run as fast as you can on the spot, you should be able to stay afloat. Well, let's try and repeat what Charles Babbage called his grand experiment. It wasn't one of his better ideas, but it demonstrates his extraordinary self-belief. Exactly what you need when you're attempting to crack a code that's remained unbroken for 2.5 centuries. So how did Babbage go about trying to crack the Vigenère cipher? Well, like other code breakers, he'd probably have begun with a test message. Now over here, I've got a test message. In fact, it's the same message we had before, defend east of castle. And like before, it's encrypted. Now at this point, Babbage would have erased everything except the encrypted text. And then Babbage would have tried to find a way of getting back from this encrypted text to the original message, pretending that he didn't know what the original message was. Now, we know that frequency analysis won't help us decipher this. So Babbage had to find some other technique, something cunning, something so devious that no other code breaker had yet discovered it. Breaking a code is like climbing a sheer cliff face. At first, the message looks like an insurmountable jumble of letters. What Babbage needed to do was to find the slightest nook or cranny to give him a foothold. Anything that would help him decipher the message. Mixing logic and intuition, he spent days counting the times each letter appeared, measuring the spaces between letters, looking for anything that might help him crack the cipher.
Most of the people who had been code breakers, they lost weight. They never got any sleep. They drank tremendous amount of coffee or whatever they had to stimulate them. They worked day and night guessing on this. It always takes them a long time to penetrate into a cipher.
Suddenly, Babbage saw something. He'd found his first clue. Eventually, he spotted this. Over here we have the letters U, J, D. And over here we have the same sequence of letters U, J, D repeated. Now surely this isn't just a coincidence. And Babbage must have wondered, what's the meaning of this repetition?
You got a new bright idea and you feel confident you're going to solve it this weekend. This weekend I'm going to solve it. And you sit down and you work and you work. And darn it, it's not this time again either.
Babbage had spent weeks battling against the Visionaire cipher. Then, in a moment of inspiration, Babbage realised the significance of the repetition. I've put back the original message to make it easier to explain. Now let's see those repetitions again. We've got UJD here and UJD here. And then we've got AST here and AST here. This time in East, this time in Castle. So we've actually got a bit of repeated message, or AST, AST, a repeated sequence of letters at least. Now let's put the keyword back in and see what that tells us. The keyword was Turkey. Now let's do that comparison again. We've got UJD here, UJD here, AST here, AST here, as we saw last time. But when we look at the keyword, we've got URK here and URK here. The keyword is also being repeated, and that's the crucial thing to note. In fact, if you measure the distance between the UJDs, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 letters, that's the same as the length of the keyword. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 letters. In short, Babbage realised that if you find any repeated sequences of letters in the encrypted text and you measure the distance between them, then that effectively tells you the length of the key word. But where do you go from here? I think it's time for some more advice from Fred Piper.
What you do now is you say, well, if the keyword has length 6,
Right.
then I know that I'm using 6 different
Rows
Caesar
of the
ciphers.
six
Yes,
different rows
6
of the
different rows.
alphabet.
So now you can number each letter in your message according to the length of the keyword.
Right, so I'm going to mark that as a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Now that you know that every cryptogram letter with the number 1 above it has come from using the same Caesar cipher. You know how to break the Caesar cipher using frequency analysis or frequency counts.
Right.
So you now have 6 different Caesar ciphers to break.
So this is the letter that Thwaite sent to Babbage, or the encrypted letter. And again, if we want to try and decipher this, we need to look for that sort of repetition like we found the UJD.
Yeah. There's a KLLQF,
Right.
and there's a KLLQF.
Right, and we measure the distance again. So 24 letters between them, that suggests a keyword length 24.
Well, be careful, you see, it might be 24, but if it were 12, you would still get that repetition.
Right, because you get 12 and then 12
Another
again.
12, yeah, so...
And you get the repeating anyway. Again, I take every 24th letter
Yeah.
and try and apply frequency analysis again. And, or if that didn't work, then I take every 12th letter and apply frequency analysis.
Yes,
so on. And
that's right.
Eventually I get to decipher the message.
And you've got, that's the basis of the start, yes,
Right.
yes.
If at first you don't succeed, try
Guess, guess, and guess again, yes.
So, armed with Babbage's breakthrough, let's try and crack Thwaites' message. Because the keyword seems to be 24 letters long, I number each letter in the encrypted message from 1 to 24. I now assume that all the letters that fall under the number, say 10, have been encrypted using the same letter of the keyword. I then draw a chart. listing all the letters that fall under the number 10.
H, A, another H.
The commonest letter is H, so my first guess is that H represents E, the commonest letter in English.
Now, if H represents E, then that would mean G is D. It's okay. D would be A. Now, it means we've got A as an X. Now, X is a very rare letter, so I don't really like this. So let's try, let's see what happens if H is T. T is a pretty common letter. If H were T, then G would be S, that's good. D would be P, A would be M, that's a common letter. O would be A, common letter. S would be E, that's a common letter. So this is probably a highly likely arrangement. So let's see what happens if we fill in these values back on the encrypted message.
I now write in my guesses for every 10th letter and repeat the process for all the other letters. Bit by bit, with a lot of trial and error, the meaningless jumble of letters on my whiteboard is slowly transformed into the original message. It turns out to be a quote from the first act of Shakespeare's The Tempest.
Soft, sir, one word more. They are both in either's powers, but this swift business I must uneasy make, lest too light winning make the prize light.
Charles Babbage had cracked the Visionaire cipher, the first person to do so in 250 years. This was one of the greatest achievements in the history of code breaking. But Babbage never told anyone what he'd accomplished. Not until 100 years after Babbage's death were his secret notes discovered by a Danish historian of science. Ollie Frankson believes that Babbage's silence about cracking the Visionaire cipher was connected with British intelligence and the ongoing Crimean War.
My hunch is that Babbage was hushed up and asked not to publish because of the ongoing Crimean War. Everyone thought that the Visionaire cipher was safe, and everyone has used it since Napoleonic Wars. And therefore, if you could keep it under the lid that you had solved it, you certainly had an advantage.
It seems that Babbage's breakthrough was classified by the military, so Babbage received no credit for his achievement. 9 years later, his code-breaking technique was reinvented and published by a Prussian officer, Friedrich Kasiski. Ever since then, it has been known as the Kasiski test.
The sad fact is that code breakers rarely get the credit that they deserve. After all, code breaking is, by its very nature, a clandestine activity. The science of secrecy is a secret science. Next week, we'll be taking a look at an encrypted message from the First World War. Deciphering it would be the single most important achievement in the history of code breaking.
For more information on codes and code breaking and a chance to win a holiday to Egypt, visit the website at channel4.com/next step. Competition details can also be found on Fortel, page 360.